Welcome to Fueling Conversations, a sport nutrition education network podcast with Dr. James Fleming. In today's episode, we're joined by Dr. Meghan Bentley, a university lecturer, sports nutritionist, and the author of the recent publication entitled A Tale of Becoming a Sports Nutritionist. Meghan shares her journey transitioning from public health nutrition to high-performance sport, discussing the challenges of stepping into a demanding role before feeling fully prepared. She reflects on the importance of identity, reflexivity, and athlete-centered care in shaping her practice. We also discuss why vulnerability, cultural awareness, and strong relationships are key to the success in the field. Whether you're new to sports nutrition or a seasoned pro, this episode offers valuable insights and practical advice. Let's get into it. Hi Meghan, thanks for joining me today. Super excited to have you on, and this is kind of one of our extensions of what we call Research in Focus. So today we're going to talk about your recent publication, A Tale of Becoming a Sports Nutritionist. I know that's not the full title, but do you mind introducing a little bit about the topic area?
Well, thank you so much for having me, James. It's great to be here to chat to you today. So basically, how the paper came about was when I started my PhD, I very much felt thrusted into the world of high performance sport. And if I'm completely honest with you, I felt very unprepared and out of my depth. I didn't have any experience as a sports nutritionist, which I think most people can relate to. You're kind of expected to do the job, to be able to do the job before you've had a chance to do the job, kind of thing. And I didn't really have much understanding to high performance sport in general. I'd come from a background where I studied public health nutrition and valued, nutrition and food to support people's health and well-being. So basically, over the 4-year period of doing my PhD and I suppose being an early career sports nutritionist, I just learned so much about myself and who I am, who I wanted to be as a practitioner. And I just had the opportunity as well, just through my journey, to be exposed to a lot of environments. And also I was surrounded by and supported by some really incredible people. So I wanted to just take this opportunity to share my journey, share my story of how I basically discovered my role, my values and identity as a sports nutritionist in a way to really try and help other people, to maybe perhaps reassure them in perhaps the challenges and uncertainties that they're experiencing in the role, and they're not alone in that, but also in a way to maybe prompt people to reflect on their own journey and how they've established or are establishing their roles, their role as sports nutritionists and their values and identity as a part of that. Because I think that's really important for us to reflect upon so we can continue to develop the professional practice of sports nutritionists. Because I think once we as practitioners have an understanding of who we are, what we want to do, I think it helps us to be able to explain and justify to other people what it is that we do within our role. Why is that? But then importantly, what is it that we don't do? And why are we not doing that? Why are we choosing to do that? And we can be confident in kind of explaining that to others and I suppose challenging people's beliefs, but also our own beliefs about things as well. So that's how it all came about.
I found it kind of super powerful, but also really novel in the fact that you go down this academic route and you read RCTs or these trials around like how many micrograms of things and whatever else it might be. And this was the first time I've seen kind of like a really open, almost a bit autobiography kind of based like reflection on everything that kind of for me was like, oh, I can relate to that. I can relate to that. And it was something really novel that I've not really experienced much in my research space. Is this something that you saw and were aware of when you were doing your PhD? Because obviously a lot of your space is around behavior change. Or was this are you just naturally a reflective person? Because when I read you'd done 25,000 words and 100 pages, I was like, this is interesting.
Yeah, no, it is this type of approach, like confessional tale, which we can get into. It has been used in other disciplines like sports psychology, also coaching practice as well. So it wasn't something I was familiar of during my PhD, but when I wanted to get to the point to try and then pull all those lessons and reflections together, I started to do some reading, and I just come across that as a methodology, which I thought would be really helpful to our field. Because as you say, ultimately, a lot of the sports nutrition research has focused on like the what nutritional recommendations should we provide to athletes, how many grams of protein, carb, that whatnot. And of course, that research is really important. But as the profession is evolving and developing, there's more practitioners, which is very exciting, that are now in roles. People are starting to ask questions that are more like, okay, well, how do we implement those guidelines into practice? How do we get them a systemic uptake of those guidance across the people that we're working with? And therefore, how do we design our sports nutrition service? And I think because of that, we're then starting to ask questions or that shine a light on our professional practice and how we learn and develop as a profession, essentially. So yeah, definitely took inspiration from other disciplines. And to be fair, my whole PhD has basically done that, is taking good ideas from other places. All good ideas come from somewhere, right?
I'm conscious that I could, pick your brains for hours around this space, but should we delve into it? Because as we go through it, I'm sure that I'll have more questions going along the way in terms of like some of the challenges around how, if we reflect and we are open to something we want to change in ourselves, how can we then embed that across a culture, which is something we'll come to later once we've been through some of the key parts. So yeah, can you introduce I guess what it's about, and then we'll go into the 3 key moments of discovery. And I guess to start off with, are you okay to explain what the difference between reflection is and what reflexive practice is, please?
Yes, of course. This is something I think we can all do a better job at explaining, and it's quite difficult to get our heads around. So I'm going to do my best.
Yeah.
In advance if I don't get it spot on. But basically, when we reflect, there's kind of different levels to that, in the sense of, are we reflecting on basically what we did and how we did it, and maybe what kind of procedural methodologies that we could have maybe done better. So for example, if you're doing an initial consultation with an athlete, maybe you perhaps asked a question in a different, you'd ask a question maybe in a different order, to have a better flow of conversation or something. It's kind of very much reflecting on what you did procedurally in that conversation. But then reflexivity is actually thinking about, how have I as a person influenced this situation when working with people and our interpersonal interactions, and how did I feel ahead of that conversation? Perhaps I'd had a really bad day, or someone had annoyed me, and I'd come to that conversation a little bit tense and a little bit short. How have and that maybe had an influence on the level of information that the athlete was willing to share with me, and vice versa. How reflexivity also captures how is what we experience influence us as practitioners. So I suppose putting it into the context of the confessional tale on my tale of becoming a sports nutritionist is very much recognizing that I had a set of beliefs and values of what I thought sports nutrition was before I entered the role, and that kind of was helping me make sense of what I was doing, but also confused me in many ways. But then also the environments that I was working with and being exposed to different cultural practices, cultural norms within sports, then it has an influence upon my beliefs and values. So it's kind of being aware of that, so we can contribute to our growth and development in the long term.
No, I love it. I think you did a great job there, and I will be completely transparent. When I read it, I was like, "This is a new term for me." But I think I've got a critical mind, so I think I almost felt that kind of resonate with me, because I was like, "Well, I think I do that, maybe from the years of teaching and being, critiqued in that space." But I guess go on.
And just to add on that, I think when we teach students, this is something they do find. I find our master students do struggle to get their head around. I think some people are naturally very reflective people than others. Some people have a quieter inner voice that needs to be just turned up a little bit. And I think sometimes it is difficult for early career nutritionists to be reflective when sometimes you're not sure in your positionality to begin with. And that's what we're trying to raise that discussion of, to bring that to the fore, to be aware of that,
I think it's so difficult, isn't it? Because, I feel for these entry level roles where there's a lot of people sometimes competing for one or two things, and there's a narrative out there that is that maybe there might be some people having to work for free or whatever. All these things I don't necessarily agree with, but it's there. And then you go into these environments, and there's probably a bit of nervousness around actually challenging cultures or challenging people and then do people just fit the mold because that's the easiest thing to do? And then we are seeing a reasonable turnover of staff in some sports, not all sports. And I wonder whether there's an element that if we could all engage in this would actually make us all better and actually happier. ultimately. And I'm going to go into, I'll share some of my bits later. I know this is your talk, but
No,
I
it's
guess,
great to hear reflection. That's
um,
the main purpose of what I wanted to get out of this paper. So yeah, no, thanks for sharing.
and I think that takes us nicely on to that first key moment of discovery where you spoke about navigating the transition.
Mm.
Can you kind of tell us a little bit more about that space?
Yeah, so basically, when I first entered my first role as a sports nutritionist, I did feel very out of place and alone amongst people that I perceived to be, well, was very experienced, a lot more experienced than me, and I very much felt like an outsider that all of a sudden had been let in to this environment that maybe I wasn't really meant to be in, and I think because I didn't have that experience, I didn't feel like I had much to contribute, which kind of I suppose, influence those feelings of self-doubt, really, and insecurity. As I said, I studied public health nutrition, and I kind of had the sense that because I'd come from a public health nutrition background, and others maybe come from more of a sports science background, I felt very different, and I felt that I didn't maybe appreciate and understand performance or appreciate performance as much as maybe I should for the role. So I very much then took time to try and learn what it was to be a sports nutritionist in high performance sport. And what I learned through my observations is that the role of a sports nutritionist was actually one of a performance nutritionist. And my perception of that role was that we had to solely focus on athletes' performances. And that would be considered me being, good at my job, essentially. So I started adapting. I started kind of adopting that approach because I wanted to be good at my job. So I started advising athletes on what to eat, so they could enhance their performance. But I also started to think about ways that I could maybe reduce athletes' decision making, so they could then focus on their performance. Because that's what I thought the job is, and then was. And then I kind of slipped down the route of telling athletes what to do, how to do it, as opposed to maybe understanding what they want to do and how they can do those things for themselves. But to be honest with you, when I was, acting as a performance nutritionist as I thought it was, I felt very uncomfortable, and it was at conflict with myself because it was not how I perceived the role to be before I entered the job per se. Where I really valued the importance of food for nutrition and health and well-being, and also really valued people's autonomy to be able to make their own decisions, and they have the ability to be able to do that for themselves. So I just think, well, I hope that this experience just highlights how unsettling it can be for like newcomers who enter a new role for the first time, and some of the maybe challenges and internal conflict that they may face. Sometimes I think it can actually be helpful to maybe adopt those cultural norms quite early on, in a way to then develop relationships. So maybe to try and first explore our own beliefs, but then put us into a situation where we can then respectively challenge and question, why are things done this way? Why are they not done this way? And kind of then share any uncertainties and maybe ruminations that we have about the job. But I also think as well it's quite I think it's important and useful for practitioners to get a sense of what are the cultural norms and practices of a particular environment they are, considering, to see, how it also aligns to your own values and identity as well. Yeah.
I think it's a really, I mean, it's a really great paper anyway, and I think some of the reflective piece and the openness of you to give us like essentially your journal insights is really powerful. So hoping off the back of this, lots of people do read it and gain from it. What stuck with me was kind of the idea about kind of imposter syndrome, and it's an interesting one because I used to say to people all the time that I struggle with that in higher education and in my practice in performance nutrition or sports nutrition. And then one guy came up to me and said, well, maybe it's not imposter syndrome, it's just you not being comfortable with where you currently are. And actually, he kind of reframed me to think, well, it's always good to be critical or reflective, not to the point of being completely negative, but actually saying, well, maybe it's not imposter, maybe it's more that, you're feeling a little bit uncomfortable. And that's kind of natural if you're going into a new environment.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess that kind of resonated with me. And then I guess what was really good that I read and I thought was really powerful was the way that you said how over time you identified how you could show ways that you could help other people out in the performance team, and that helped you find your place. Is that did I capture that correctly when I was reading that bit?
Say that again, sorry.
The idea behind you found it quite difficult to resonate with some individuals or try and find your place, and then over time, several months in, how you kind of found ways that you could help other people, other performance team members out in their roles, and how
Yes.
that helped you find a kind of a place in that team.
Yeah, I think that links back to me transitioning in the difficulty I had when I transitioned in, because I wanted to, learn more. So, and then to do that, I was trying to find ways in which that I could be helpful to other people. And I wasn't just a bit of a burden that, needed all this development. It was like, well, how could I, help other people? And that's what, and in, I suppose, wanting to do that, helped me to be exposed to different types of environments and different cultures across the high performance system, because I had the opportunity to go and like shadow and support people in their roles, but also in doing that, I was able to therefore develop good relationships with these people. I wasn't trying to come in and tell everybody that I believe this and this is what you
Yeah.
think I was doing. I was generally seeking to understand what it was that we do within this role and why is that. And I think then I've become kind of quite embedded in the environment that then it kind of gave me, I suppose, permission in a way to be able to ask maybe those difficult questions around, why do we focus on performance? Why do we call ourselves performance nutritionists? And I think it's only because I come from a place of like, seeking to understand and help, and generally, caring about the profession and people that I started to have those, like, those critical
Yeah.
share my critical reflections and questions. And to be honest, that was one of the first pieces of feedback that I received when I had a practitioner role, was that I was told that I was good at asking questions in a way that challenges people to think, but not in a way that I'm trying. It's threatening. It's because I'm generally interested and intrigued and wanting to learn. What you think? How it's similar, different to what I think, and da da da. Yeah.
Is that something you've developed over time, or is that just because that's quite a skill to be able to ask questions that aren't kind of put people on the back foot, sometimes?
Yeah, I think it probably comes from the fact that my own insecurities actually, because I know that I don't know all the answers. I don't have all the answers about things, and it's just an interest, and eager to learn as well. But then I do have quite a strong, I suppose, moral compass also. So I will lead by being inquisitive and curious. But then and I'm really enjoy meeting new people and building relationships. And then it's supposed just then finding the right time to then share what your moral compass is, or to
Yeah.
guide those conversations, if that makes sense.
No,
Yeah.
no, I love it, and I think I sort of say to some of our students that there's some roles that are quite fractional in sports nutrition. That's not going to change, but I think where you can also build your kind of need and build your impact is where you're doing integrate with or discuss with head of medicine, um, doctors, physios, rehabbers, sports scientists, and actually just engage in what they're doing, because there's often lots of overlap with nutrition that people aren't aware of. We assume it because we've been embedded in our education system.
Hmm.
And then we go into these environments sometimes. I can only speak for myself. We go into these environments and we kind of, there's an assumption that, of course, the S&C knows that that's what I do. And of course, the physio knows that
Yeah.
nutrition can help with the
Yeah.
tendon injury or whatever. But actually, that is not always the case. And having those kind of conversations and being around and inquisitive, like you say, is super powerful to actually build the narrative around what we can actually do and how we can all
Hmm.
work holistically, which is ultimately what athletes want in my experience, rather than having loads of isolated conversations with individual practitioners.
Yeah,
It's not an
definitely.
effective use of time. Can you?
And I often think as well, sorry, it just made me
Oh,
think that, it's actually recognizing that other people may feel this uncertainty in their role and imposter syndrome. We're not going to be the only one. So therefore, how can we better help each other by communicating what we
yeah.
do, why we do, and learn from other people as well to better support
I
that we all
do
might be
find it
feeling a
quite
little bit
I
like
do
that,
find it quite tricky though, right? So because again, I'll just share one of the examples when I was working in a rugby setup, and it was my first job as well. And um, it was you sometimes get into these environments and it's so focused on doing the job. So you're up at 7 in the morning for breakfast, you're all on the same table together, you're talking about wellness scores. Then you go into next, and it's actually having your team debrief at 8 o'clock at night, and you're still talking about rugby in this sense. So at that point, there's actually been no light on conversations. Maybe when you're walking from the team room to the pitch, you might have a few chats about stuff, but I would say 99% of conversations are around the job, the sport, the individuals. So what I
yeah.
really struggled with was actually building proper connection outside of I am a nutritionist, sports nutritionist. You are the doctor, and I don't know anything about you other than that you are lovely.
Mhm.
Like I know you're lovely. We all get on. But like one of the examples I'm happy to share is that my wife was pregnant with my first child, and I was like, I'm actually going to play a little game here. I'm not going to tell anyone until someone asks what's going on in my life. And it was only until Sienna, my daughter, was born that they found out via WhatsApp because it got that far. Like there was no,
Yeah.
it's a strange one because you can sometimes get really engulfed in things. And I think openness, reflection, and being kind of having that kind of deep breath, like it's just sport. These are people, and actually the
Mhm.
athletes don't always want to be 100% in. It's good to be able to step back. But yeah, I found that quite interesting when reading your piece too, because again, there's lots in there that kind of resonate in terms of how I could have navigated that in reality. I probably didn't do the right thing in being stubborn and not telling them. I could have just been open, but
Mhm.
it's an interesting space. Um,
And it's an interesting reflection as well. It's like how can we, I suppose, model the behaviours that we want to see, in a way.
yeah, I mean, I was so junior and so fresh and so keen to, and I loved it. But it's just in reflection, maybe 6, 7 years
Yeah.
later, I'm going, hmm, okay, what could I have
But
done? And
but
yeah,
it suggests that you didn't feel valued in that situation, in that environment,
yeah,
because they didn't feel it was important to share. You should
yeah,
be
interesting, isn't
felt.
it?
Hmm.
Can you just explain to the listener of how you decided to rename yourself from a performance nutritionist to a sport nutritionist, please? Because I found that
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah. So I suppose this links to the main links to the second
Yeah.
key learning and reflection in the paper, doesn't it? Where I kind of recognised the importance of compassionate support as a sports
Mm,
nutritionist, given the emotional pressures and uh, performance pressures and emotional burden essentially that athletes can experience in high performance sport. So in our qualitative research, which is the kind of realist tale that sits behind the confessional tale, I kind of learned about the paradoxical role of performance. So very much like athletes are driven by performance, but this can be very demanding and constant in their lives. That it actually can be unhelpful and affect their well-being and therefore also their adherence to nutritional guidance. But I also learned about the negative emotions that athletes can experience when following nutritional guidance as well, and feelings of sadness, shame, guilt. For example, athletes shared that say if they were doing badly in a competition or if training wasn't going that well, they would they would feel bad, it make them feel sad, and then they don't then want to eat some foods that were maybe not considered as part of the guidance to and eat foods that make them happy. But then actually they found that when eating those foods, they didn't feel happy. They actually then felt guilty. And then this was also played out in injury as well. When athletes were injured, they obviously felt very low mood, they felt sad, and they almost felt they didn't deserve to eat because of that. So it's really started to challenge my own assumptions and biases that actually motivate everybody. All athletes are motivated by performance, and it's a positive experience for all. It's not necessarily the case from listening to the athletes I spoke to, and also that the role of the nutritionist was to solely focus on performance because of some of the unintended consequences and actions from that, essentially. So I started to become really self-aware at how I was maybe perpetuating this performance narrative. Um, and I kind of really started to empathise with athletes, just about the kind of pressures that are placed on them and the stressful environment that they operate in, with selection policies and the rigid kind of training schedule and trainings and competition schedules that you described throughout the day. Back It's all very back to back. And it was only really when a colleague and good friend kind of pulled me aside and gave me some really honest and candid feedback about his concerns around how I was maybe developing relationships with athletes, maybe what I was focusing on. And obviously that was quite hard feedback to take, but actually I really appreciated it because I knew it came from a place of care, and it came from a place of wanting to help me develop and grow rather than like criticize and shame me kind of thing. And I suppose that was reflecting on their approach to that conversation, but also the relationships that I suppose we've developed since that conversation. So I simply started that kind of gave me the permission to be the sports nutritionist who I wanted to be, rather than to be the performance nutritionist, which I thought is what other people thought I should be. So I was just more confident to kind of focus more about athletes' health and well-being, and protecting their health and well-being, and actually giving them the autonomy to decide what they want to focus on and how they want to do that. And I kind of realised that my job as a practitioner in the environment was to actually dilute and buffer this pressure on performance, because athletes know the pressure of performance. They know it's there. We don't need to reinforce it. If actually we can do a much better job at almost pretending it's not there and focusing on things that are more person-centered to rebalance that focus. And so it's more holistic, and it's more about a balanced well-being and a balanced identity, which isn't just about performance. It's about the person and their personal goals within, but also beyond sport and outside of sport as well. But I also feel like the working in Paralympic sport really helped me to practice in a way that aligned with my values and identity. And that's because Paralympic sports are very much underpinned by the Paralympic movement, which recognises that athletes are human beings first. So sport is not just about, the meaning of sport is not just about winning. Sport is about social inclusion in Paralympic sport. It's about the meaning that sport brings to people's lives, and success is very much determined by what athletes' growth and development rather than performance outcomes. But also the people that I was working with very much lived by that value of the Paralympic movement. They believed in that approach as well, which was really, really helpful. So I think early on, my imposter syndrome, if you want to call it that, or the uncertainties that I had about myself, kind of overshadowed this compassion that maybe I had for athletes. And that may resonate with some of the listeners, that may not. It may be something that people can perhaps learn as they become more confident and competent in the role. But for me, I kind of then decided to call myself a sports nutritionist, which is actually how I was trained, which is what our courses are called. When we look at our master's degree, it's a sport and exercise nutrition. So yeah, I now call myself a sports nutritionist, and I ask, that's how I identify myself. That's how I ask other people within sport to refer to me as, because I just feel like it better captures the role. Because for me, sport is more about the person, it's more about the health and performance, where for me I was a bit cautious that performance nutritionist implies that my job was to solely focus on performance, when that's not how I perceived or identified the role to be, basically.
I guess that's a really good answer. I think it's important because for those that are maybe aspiring to be performance nutritionists or are in the graduate registration, the SCNR asks people to openly talk about their philosophy and values. I remember when I did this the first time around for my practitioner registration, and it's interesting because it aligns with what I reflected quite hard on this, because I was like, this is an interesting question. I don't know what it is, and it's always constantly evolving. And it was that health and well-being first, because actually how are we getting performance if we haven't focused on that in the first place?
Yeah.
Doesn't really make sense anyway. So that's a bit obsolete. And then how do we get buy-in from that? Well, athletes want to know you care, and it can be quite challenging, right? When you're in 1 day a week or whatever it is, to have the time to build relationships. So I guess from my point, 2 pence is to not put pressure on yourself to get to know everyone straight away, and take time and try and do it in the most natural environment. But what was really nice in this section is that you highlighted how you started showing personal interest beyond sport in the athletes. And I think sometimes people are so keen to say, well, I've got a master, I've got a PhD, I've got whatever. I want to throw my knowledge at these people to impress people that way. And often we don't realize that it can be quite overwhelming. And sometimes actually, and one of the reasons we'll go into the next bit in a second, but one of the reasons I like doing body composition is because you have 1-to-1 time, or 1-to-2 if you've got a scribe or whatever, where you can just talk about anything. And I used to use that 10, 15, 20 minutes to just talk to them about their life. And it's a great opportunity to build a rapport, and then you might get better buy-in. So that was what really resonated with me in that space, and really powerful, the idea about shame, sadness, and guilt, which I've written down in my notes, because it's almost sad, isn't it? It's almost sad that is something that we can almost accentuate if we just fit that, if we don't challenge our approach.
Definitely. And I think it's as we're, I suppose finding our new identity as a practitioner and sports nutritionist is sometimes reminding ourselves that, how other people are going to perceive us. So they're going to perceive us as the expert, as people who know. So sometimes by, as you say, going in to almost offload all of our knowledge and understanding, which I definitely did at the beginning, is probably not, should not be it's not really the priority. Amazing psychologists that I work with always taught me that the relationship is always a priority when it comes to behaviour change in particular. So in the interactions that we do have with athletes are so critical. And I suppose how I changed my approach to my practice was in my conversations with athletes, I wasn't focusing on what they were eating to enhance their performance. It was more, I took my foot off the gas there a little bit and just generally just took time to get to know them as people, have really more informal conversations and let them guide the conversation if they wanted to focus on that, rather than me kind of forcing it and kind of pushing it.
And I guess you can do that with more confidence, right? Because if
Yes,
you can say,
exactly.
well, let's have a chat, and I know that this chat we're going to have is going to identify probably one or two really nice low-hanging fruit moments that we can maybe nudge, or maybe not nudge. But it's quite hard when you've gone into this kind of route of academia to go, I'm just going to strip this back, and all I'm going to focus on is them having another glass of water before they train in the morning. But at that point, that is manageable. And actually, I've had a chat about why and when and all these other things, and it can be. I think that's something I've reflected on over time as well. It is difficult, isn't it?
You're right. It does definitely come with confidence because, again, well, from my experience, it's almost like, well, people are. I'm here to do a job, and I want people to know that I'm doing a job. So almost sometimes when you're not focusing on that, you feel like you're not doing anything. But actually, that's where the value is, and where in the long term you'll be more effective in your role because you spent time prioritizing the relationship and rather
Yeah.
than performance per se. Yeah.
And I guess para space as well. There's a lot of nuance with regards to disability and bits in there as well. So again, even more so, probably even more heightened in terms of getting to know the individual to understand the nuance behind their ailment. So yeah.
I do think, and a lot of listeners and yourself, James, have heard of motivational interviewing. But I think particularly the spirit of motivational interviewing for me has been really helpful in framing those conversations because we can still be proactive and productive in our roles, but it's how we go about these conversations that respects the person and what's important to them. And working in partnership with them, accepting where they are in their development and what they want to work on, and being compassionate to where they are at this stage of their development. We might, want to be doing some really advanced nutritional strategies to enhance their performance, but actually, what's best for them at this stage, and what's significant change for them because that's doing a good job. It's all
100%.
yeah.
100%. Just something springs to mind. I'm working with a para athlete at the moment, and he sent me a really open and honest food diary entitled "The Diary of a Junkie," and I thought, "Oh, what am I going to see here?" And lots of Kinder Buenos and things like that. So there was lots of easy wins, but it just really resonated at that point. Should we go
Yeah.
into point three, which
But
is
he might be eating those Kinder Buenos because he enjoys it and it
well, he
makes him
does, and
happy.
that's fine.
And
Yeah,
athletes are allowed to eat foods that they enjoy as well, But as we say, if you're eating it every day, is it for enjoyment or is it a
yeah.
habit that could be? What can we add to that so you're better meeting your nutritional
Yeah.
requirements and yeah.
I've not even mentioned Kinder Buenos yet. That's a down the line route. But so should
Save
we?
that for
Yeah,
later.
that never does. So number three on the kind of moments of discovery. I realise I'm taking lots of your time, but this is just super interesting. So navigating collaboration in nutrition athlete relationships. Can you kind of go into what you shared there?
Yeah, so I think that as sports nutritionists, but also as I think sports science practitioners in general, actually, um, we tend to deliver a service or an intervention on athletes rather than in partnership with them. And I think this is kind of touching upon what we were just talking about there as well. And I think this is one of the many reasons why I like the behavioural science approach, is because it's all about taking time to understand the athlete, their experiences, and then using that information to basically deliver a service which is really targeted and tailored to their needs, as opposed to, I suppose, us coming in and feeling like we need to be the expert to tell them, essentially. So talking to athletes and doing that behavioural and analysis, where we take time to understand their thoughts, their feelings, their experiences of nutrition, for me was just really valuable in developing that collaborative approach to the nutrition athlete relationship. And I just I just feel like we often don't get a chance to do that. I think sometimes we only have a short amount of time with athletes, so there's that pressure to just give information. But kind of, I just saw the real value in actually spending time, either individual conversations or smaller group conversations, where it wasn't my job to give advice. I was there to understand them and their experiences. They would have had previous experiences with nutritional support, for example. So what was that like? What are their thoughts and feelings around food and nutrition in general, basically? And I think taking that approach actually showed the athletes that I did really care about them and I was really interested in them when it comes to kind of developing that relationship, shall we say. But it also helped me to understand individual differences as well. So, for example, some athletes find body composition monitoring really helpful, to monitor their dietary behaviour, but others really don't. They find it extremely unhelpful, and actually, it can cause maladaptive eating and restrictive eating. And I've had the privilege of speaking across. Speaking to a range of athletes now, over 80 athletes in my research, but also my consultancy research and in behavioural science. And it's just given me, I suppose, a wider perspective to those different experiences. Like there's no one truth to athletes' experiences with nutrition. And therefore, it's gave me the confidence to deliver a service that catered for individual needs and not like a one size fits all approach. And again, I think parasport really enabled me to supported me in doing that, because we do recognise individual differences in parasport, because clinically they all have individual differences. But I would argue in all sports, athletes have individual differences. It just happens to be that in parasport, it's more obvious because of their physical impairment. So yeah, it just kind of gave me just made me realise actually there's different ways of doing nutritional support, both across roles, but also within roles as well to athletes. And it's been confident to having the confidence to explain that and do that was really helpful for my development journey, I suppose. Yeah.
I guess being kind of devil's advocate here, for those people that walk into an environment and they go, I want to adopt this focus group approach where I'm going to open and ask some inquisitive questions, try and understand the athlete or the practitioner or the other people you're working with. What do we do if athletes just aren't interested? Do you know what I mean? Because there's always, and do we sweat that? Or because, I remember in my first role, I was like, I'm probably only getting like 30% buy-in. And I was just like, that's not good enough. And then I was, beating myself up on that. And now I'm like, I'll take 30% buy-in. I was wondering what you would say to those kind of practitioners that are out there and they're going, oh, this is a great idea, I'm going to go and do that. But then they think it's just not going to happen because people won't turn up, or the coach or whoever, that they don't necessarily buy in. Is there any kind of things you might be able to share on maybe how to navigate that?
Yeah, I think it's always going to be a challenge, isn't it? Because we can't force people to do stuff. We create opportunities to provide the best support that we can. So those that want to engage, I think, we always prioritise supporting them first. But it's sometimes being a bit compassionate to maybe they've got other things that are going on that are more important to them. And actually, is it that their time, energy, and effort, if they feel that they can't give to all the disciplines, is actually better placed elsewhere. And again, I suppose this touches upon the individual approach as well, and how we can operate it in the parasport that I worked in is, being available to provide nutritional support, but actually what's the priority for that individual person? Is it that they need to really focus on their physio and getting really consistent with behaviours around physio? Actually, they really need to spend some really in-depth work with the psych. So that's the priority for them. So that's kind of how, I suppose, when we talk about working interdisciplinary as well, I think that's what I mean about individual providing support that suits individual preferences, but also individual needs as well.
Yeah, and I guess it's not about overloading people, like you said before. You want to care about the individual. Imagine you got to kind of put yourself in their shoes and be like, okay, so the psych wants me, the S&C wants me, the coach wants me.
Yeah.
I've got stuff going on at home like any other individual, and now the nutritionist at me. Like you've got to be able to have impact and support the whole process. So I suppose that is again that talking to other people across the disciplines and understanding where the athlete is and where their head is and what their priorities are. So then put it back on you, right? Because then I'm not there going, that person doesn't want to know. Well, actually, exactly. I've not even asked the question. Maybe they do, but maybe now's not the right time. It's really, really, really good point.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I think what I'd say, what you articulate really nicely is how you manage that body composition practice to then a new approach. So for those, when you do read this paper, you'll see how Meghan managed that, which is really good and super powerful from my kind of anthropometry head on as well. So yeah, really good. I'm conscious of time, so we'll move on to the last few bits, I guess. Key takeaways we've kind of been through, but do you want to talk us through practical implications or the real kind of key points that you want to hammer home here for maybe current practitioners, past or future?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think firstly, I really hope to encourage practitioners to embrace vulnerability by kind of sharing the uncertainty that we might feel within our roles, and maybe even the mistakes that we've made or we're making. For me, my experience so far has taught me that nobody is perfect. It's okay to do badly at things. Like growth comes from actually getting stuff wrong and stuff not going well. That's basically how we learn, isn't it? Like if things are always perfect, then what have we actually learned? So, for example, this podcast today, I'll probably go away after today and be like, "Oh God, I didn't do a very good job at that. Didn't do a very good job at that." But that's fine because I'm not perfect and I'm not trying to be, I suppose. And that's taken me a long time to be confident in saying. So it's encouraging. It's encouraging that, and I think that by but also having the kind of stance that we are always becoming. We're always coming. We're never the final product, So I think that gives me more certainty, I suppose, in who I am and who I want to be. So I hope to encourage other people to show fallibility. That we're not all perfect. We're not all perfect, and I think and I hope that the more we start to, I suppose, talk in this way, it will be normalised, and we can start to reflect on our practice and then continue to develop the professional practice. And I hope that in this paper we've started to kind of model that and encourage other people to do the same. And I would love to see more written accounts of people's own experiences, so we can get a better understanding of how people have developed their professional practice, the role, their values of identity over time as well. Would be great.
I think it's just so powerful. It's something that, like, I kind of, without being too kind of over the top, it kind of blew me away a little bit because I've not been exposed to this approach to research, and I have felt just personally kind of, you look sometimes out there at the space of sports nutrition because it's still evolving so quickly, and then obviously social media exemplifies stuff, and it does make you sometimes feel like you're doing, what is this crazy voodoo science? And actually sharing people do share, but sometimes it's selective sharing, right? Because if I want to look good, I'm going to put a picture up of whatever. Like, I can manipulate that. That's what social media often does. Whereas just you coming on here and that paper, like, it's so open, so reflective. It means that it kind of adds kind of confidence in other people. It's just a really powerful statement. I wonder whether from a practical perspective, are you encouraging people to journal, or how do we reflect? That's a hard question, but yeah, how do we do that?
Well, firstly, I think just to encourage reflective practice, and good practitioners I know do this very well, and it can be done in multiple different ways. I think people often think that it needs to be a very formal process. For me, I think I reflect in different ways. So, when you're driving home from work, or when you're finishing a job, or you're between kind of meetings, you'll already be kind of thinking, "Oh God, what did I say then? How did that kind of come across? Or how do you think that landed?" Da, da, da. You're asking yourself some questions. I personally, throughout this process, I did write down my reflections because I was a PhD student, so it was my main job, really, I suppose. But I also do really value. I think writing is a process of discovery. For me, actually, writing helps me to process my thoughts a bit more. But other people can, reflect in all different ways. I know some people that like to, actually record it as a voice note, so they can communicate that reflection verbally. But I think what's important to also recognise, and that we've touched upon in the paper as well, is it doesn't always have to be done alone as well. Actually, there's such value in sharing our reflections with critical friends or people we feel comfortable with, who can help us make sense of what we're experiencing, and to help to shape and challenge our own beliefs and help us in that process. And we're quite fortunate at Leeds Beckett University. We have an applied sport nutrition group, and I know other universities do have this as well. But we do come together once a month, and we kind of share some of the uncertainties and the challenges that we're facing within our roles, and just get a sense of other people's thoughts and ideas on that to help develop our own thinking, but also to give us confidence in what we're thinking as well, maybe. But it would also be great to see professional bodies like the Sport and Exercise Nutrition Register maybe offer some peer network and support for people who I know don't necessarily have access to that type of support so easily. So yeah.
I think it's a great answer, and I remember reading in your paper about the impact that some people in your work have had. So I
Mhm.
suppose it's like, the term mentor gets thrown around quite a lot at the moment, and there's some you can have paid mentors or unofficial and all these other things. I guess it's like, could you lean on people that you respect, that have similar values to you, that have maybe
Yes.
had more experience than you, not necessarily just in nutrition, and
Yeah, exactly.
and just having those conversations, and again, it may or may not be appropriate, but one of the most powerful things for me in my current role was that one of our administrators was doing behavioral psychology, and she needed someone to do some work on, so she did 360 feedback, and I'd really encourage people to
Hmm.
try things like that, and you get people from different stakeholders to give feedback on you and in your
Yes,
practice, and it's something that's I've never done before, and it's just super powerful.
definitely. And
Um,
I think what's important there is the 360 feedback for people who aren't familiar is you basically get other people around you, so almost like the 360 view of yourself, essentially. But I think that we can play a key role in actually asking for
yeah,
feedback. And I know I was very reluctant to do that early on because I was already feeling really uncertain. So there's a level
yeah,
of
a little
uncertainty
daunting.
that come with that, but it can be really helpful again if it's done in a way of people wanting to help and care and be supported and support you in that. Um, I was going to say something else, but it's just completely slipped my mind. So,
No, no, and I'm very conscious that we were only meant to do half hour on here, and I've kept you for ages. But
oh no,
yeah,
not
I
at all.
just want to thank you, Megan, because again, like I knew you were doing this paper. We'd planned to have this chat some time ago, and having read it, probably being the space I am in my career and life, but also being kind of critical in nature anyway. I think it's been really powerful to have your insights and shared story that I can see resonates with me, but I will know will resonate with lots of people who have been there, who are going to be there, and who are currently there. So I. I really do implore everyone to read this journal. It's open access, which is great. I'll share it on the notes. I'll share it on my social media for my 4 followers. But yeah, really really powerful stuff, and I appreciate you coming on and talking to me today.
Oh, you're so welcome. It's been an absolute pleasure. Can I do a really cheeky plug though,
Yeah, go for it.
before we end? I don't know if people are aware, but there's been the Performance Nutrition Journal that's recently launched with Gareth Wallace being the chief editor, and we are actually doing a collection on a behavioural approach to optimise athlete health and performance through sport nutrition. So if anybody's conducting research in this area who's looking for somewhere to house their research, would be really interested and love to hear from you. The information will be on the website shortly, but if anyone's got any questions, you feel free to contact me directly if you're able to put that.
Lovely. Yeah, if you send me some details on that, Megan, I'll put it on the notes to the YouTube and to the Spotify once I get it up and running, and we'll go from there. Brilliant. Thanks so
Amazing.
much.
Thank you so much.
Cheers.
See ya.